All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the College Football Podcast. Today I'll be doing my preview and prediction for Iowa and Ohio State. The Buckeyes, third-ranked team in the country, hosting a team with a phenomenal defense. Underrated Big Ten matchup here. The Shoes are 20.5-point favorites. 44.5 is the total. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time from Columbus. Getting things started with the Iowa offense. You start with Cade McNamara, the Michigan transfer, a guy that, we kind of felt when he left Michigan would certainly allow them to, the Wolverines to elevate their game, and they did that significantly. He's resulted in, numerous Big Ten crowns, national championship, and whatnot. And, he's been as good as I guess you can be at Iowa. Putting it quite frank, this is a scheme. It's just not quarterback friendly. I don't think it matters really how talented you are playing here at this school with the weapons you have. It's quite limited. It's going to be hard to execute. You certainly need to see stability, though, and I don't know if McNamara has exactly done that. Against Iowa State in the loss, completed 45% for 99 yards, 2 interceptions, the only 2 he has on the year against Minnesota last week, or the last game, that is. 62 yards, it's not great on 11 completions, though, protected the football. Balance is really what you look for Iowa, and for them, it's probably like 150 passing yards per game, and sometimes that's just a tough ask to get out of them. But if they can hit that number in most cases, they're certainly going to be in a good, opportunity to beat whoever they're playing. Against Ohio State, of course, you really need to see much more production than that. But we got to be realistic here. And the weapons he has aren't all that great. Jacob Gill leads the way with 13 receptions, 145 yards, and a touchdown. Reese Vanderzee, the freshman who exploded onto the scene in week 1, hasn't really seen the ball much since then. Only 2 receptions for 28 yards. This is a team that's just not all that talented. They don't really make that much of an effort to improve their passing game either. Pretty unserious approach is how I put it in the offseason. One thing they've always had, those tight ends, and they have 2 of them here that can certainly be game changers. Luke Lochley, this guy has 97 yards on 12 receptions. Addison Ostrenga, 11 for 63 and a touchdown. The numbers aren't all that great, but these are guys that you certainly want to be able to find across the sticks, maybe in the red zone if you can ever get there. Those are really what the responsibilities are for the tight ends, including blocking, of course. They're phenomenal in that regard. That's about it for this passing attack, though. Not many numbers to speak of. Just need to be accurate and take care of the ball. Obviously, when you're playing Ohio State, there's going to be tight windows you're going to have to force it into. You're going to have to make plays on the run. Can McNamara do that? I'm just not quite sure that he can. But the good news is they have a rushing attack that's resurrected itself after, disappearing for a number of seasons. Or, for a long time, Iowa, that's what they had. It was a one-dimensional offense with a great rushing attack that disappeared for a little bit. Caleb Johnson, he's been tremendous. 9 touchdowns, 685 yards through 4 games. Coming off season highs on the road against Minnesota with 206 in 3 of those scores. I mean, these are just ridiculous numbers he's putting up. 8 1/3 per carry. He's been carrying the load for this entire offense, but they're finally starting to spring, some open lanes. 200-plus rushing in 4 straight games. I mean, this team finally does have a bit of an offense, because last year they played pretty poor opponents, and they couldn't even run the ball on them. They only had 2 games last year of 200-plus rushing, and one of those came against a, group of 5 opponent. So this is a team, all of a sudden, they've done it against Iowa State. They just did it against the in-conference foe. They're able to run the football, and that's because this offensive line has a lot of experience. They're finally starting to click as well. Mason Richmond on the left side at his tackle position, he's been tremendous. Bayou Stevens at left guard as well. You look at Logan Jones at center, one of the better ones in the country. Connor Colby, an All-American, having a phenomenal year. He's a great run blocker at his right guard spot. And then Jennings Dunker at right tackle. I mean, this offensive line across the board has just been tremendous, and it's not that big of a shock because of the aforementioned experience. But these are things that we saw with Iowa over the last couple of years that have been, negatives. The run game had not been great. The O-line had been kind of disappointing. And right now, Kirk Ferentz has this group clicking in that regard. And they're tough to beat if they can be physical and run the ball. Obviously, being one-dimensional, going on the road to Columbus is not going to be ideal. But if you can run the ball and you can, get your tight ends involved a little bit more in a contest like this, you might have something cooking, because this team doesn't have to put up an abundance of points. If they can score 3 touchdowns, they're most likely going to win the football game. That's usually the approach for Iowa. So, as always, it's a one-dimensional group, but it's not the same Iowa offenses in the past. They're putting up 32 points per game so far compared to the 15 they were putting up last year per contest. So this is a much different unit, much improved. Yes, similar style, similar scheme, but to a better tune this year. Moving to the Ohio State offense, this unit is putting up almost 50 points per game. Will Howard, the big acquisition from Kansas State, he's having a good year. I wouldn't exactly call it outstanding or elite just yet, but for the first month, he has 69% completion rating, 260 yards per game, 8 touchdowns, 2 interceptions coming over the last 2 contests. Yet to have a 300-yard passing game, so they're certainly still trying to get in full sync with this receiving group that, of course, is led by a phenomenal true freshman in Jeremiah Smith, 19 grabs for 364 and 5 touchdowns. Egmeka Egbuka also has 90 yards per game with 362 and only 2 touchdowns, but he does lead the way with 21 receptions. And then Carnell Tate, another one of those high-end recruits they picked up, has 14 receptions for 200-plus yards. Brandon Ennis has barely saw the football. Guys like Bryson Rogers, G. Scott, a couple of veterans they have in this group. For the most part, that tree I'll rattle off, these guys are probably the best in America. And I think this passing attack has continued to grow. They're going to continue to get better, even though it hasn't been a complete onslaught. They're not putting up 400 yards per game by any means, but, whatever. You don't have to do that. They're not here to add style points. We're trying to get better, and we're trying to win football games at the end of the day, and that's what Ohio State is doing with this passing attack. They're here for championships, not exactly Heisman trophies or anything, so I don't think Will Howard, in terms of stats, who cares, right? But he does have 3 rushing touchdowns. When he announced he was transferring to Ohio State, I said, they're getting a guy who is a pretty good dual threat, I would say. For his size, he showcased tremendous speed at 235 while he was at KSU. This is a live runner, especially at the goal line. He has a rushing tud in 3 straight games now, so this is certainly going to be a part of his repertoire that's going to be utilized against a very tough defense, so one that has been allowing a lot of big passing plays early on this season. You like to think maybe they can get that anchored down after a bye week, but that's one area they might be able to look to exploit Iowa, is with that passing attack downfield. It's a big cover 2 shell that they play, so these guys are going to be forced to have to win tough matchups in Ohio State. They have incredibly talented pass catchers that can do that with ease. You look at this run game. In the season opener against Akron, it was pretty disappointing. The offensive line didn't look all that good. Only had 170 yards. The last 3 weeks, though, they've really kicked it in the high gear. They beat up on some willful opponents, but against Michigan State, 31-point victory. They looked pretty good. 5.5 yards per carry almost, 185 yards on 35 attempts. Obviously, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson's one of the best duos you'll ever see in college football. And these guys, they've been splitting touches, right down the middle. They've got pretty identical numbers, even though Judkins is leading the way of 16 more attempts, has 390 yards and 5 scores, compared to Henderson has 276 and 4 as well. And then you got a freshman in James Peoples who's getting involved, mainly in garbage time, but he's been pretty solid for them as well. I mean, this is an incredibly deep backfield. This run game is what Ohio State wants to start with. And it was a big problem for them last year. The offensive line wasn't generating a great push. We went from a run-first team to a pass-first team. And this offensive line, I still have question marks about. We're going to find out what they're really made of here against a great Hawkeyes front. Josh Simmons is showcasing phenomenal improvements at left tackle. Getting Donovan Jackson back into the lineup the last 2 games at left guard, I know, is a big beneficiary for them. Seth McLaughlin at center. He's having a good season so far. This is a guy that was pretty poor for Bama last year, so now they enter conference play. We'll see if that gets to him. Tajabola at right guard, a guy that I'm also really not all that confident in, so we'll see what they do with that position, because Austin Shirvarad is also kind of in contention, I think, because he's played a lot of snaps so far this year. And then Josh Fryer, having a bit of an iffy season over at right tackle, but for the most part, this is an Ohio State offensive line that should be good enough to handle this front. They should be able to give Will Howard passing windows, and this team is just incredibly difficult to contain because the long developing routes they have, the amount of space they generate with their wide receivers. That's going to be something Iowa's going to probably do a pretty good job of containing, and I think running the ball in this game is going to be a little bit tougher, so we'll see if the offensive line can indeed take over this contest. I think there's a lot of questions to be asked. Back in 2022 when they played Iowa, though, they had 30 attempts, only 66 yards. That was a season low by a quite wide margin. So the offensive line in the past couple of years has been an issue. In a matchup like this, you really wonder how much they're going to be able to run the ball. But with these incredibly talented backs, these guys are incredibly explosive, especially Henderson on the edge, Judkins with his ability to shed tacklers, between the tackles. I mean, these guys can certainly be the difference makers if the O-line is struggling, so they should be able to have capable balance in this game. But we're going to find out some things about Ohio State that have yet to be answered. Moving to the Iowa defense, the unit that at times hasn't been as dominant as you would have hoped against Iowa State. They ended up blowing that game in the second half. gave up some big passing plays in pretty much every game they've played so far. I mean, they're still pretty great, though, and obviously you got to be picky when it comes to great units like this, and they're giving up about 14 points per game. But in terms of yards and what they're doing on the ground, not much is being given up. You look at a team that is currently 4th nationally against the run, Ohio State. They're right above them at 3rd. So 2 great run defenses here. And we'll stay with the Hawkeyes, though. This is a team that season high was allowed against Iowa State, only 89 yards rushing. Have yet to allow a rushing touchdown all season. Only 1 of 2 teams have done that. So, I mean, this is a team that is phenomenal against the run. They always have been. They're just incredibly stout and tough. On the D-line, of course, we'll talk about their linebackers. Ethan Hurkett, though, up front, leading the way. He's been a phenomenal run defender. Veteran Deontay Craig, like his abilities. He can also take over as a pass rusher. Yaya Black, Aaron Graves. I mean, these are guys who have been in the program for a couple of years now. They understand the pedigree to play in a program like this. So they're well built to show up, even though they might not be elite standouts on a draft board or anything like that. Biggest thing for them is they have 2 great linebackers. Nick Jackson, he was one of the only, I think he's the only transfer actually over the last couple of years they picked up from Virginia, and obviously he fits the mold to play here, and that's why they got him. He's been a great linebacker for them as a second leading tackler, alongside Jay Higgins, who he's been elite. Phenomenal start to the year in run defense. Only 1 missed tackle. He's great in coverage. I mean, this is a guy that is just absurd. He's a stat sheet stuffer. He had 2 interceptions already after having 1 last year. So, I mean, this is a guy that has continued to improve his game. I mean, running the ball on these dudes is so hard, and Higgins is just so good at what he does. Doesn't have a tackle for loss yet. Doesn't have a sack. He was a tackle machine a season ago, though. This is a guy that's going to continue to be great, but he is so good in coverage as well. That can be a great difference maker. We'll see how he does against these running backs, though, if they're running routes in his area. The thing about the secondary is, they've been a bit shaky this far, and they're certainly capable of being much better. Alluded to this cover 2 shell that Phil Parker likes to operate out of. Sebastian Castro in the slot. He's great. He's the best slot corner in America. He's a great run defender as well. Very disciplined in coverage. Castro is a great player. Jamari Harris, TJ Hall. Harris, on one hand, has been terrific in coverage. He's only allowed a couple of receptions for 66 yards. Hall, on the other hand, he's been a little bit woeful. He's given up some big plays. Deshaun Lee has played the CB2 role a little bit. Certainly you want to see these guys improve, though, because they are 130th nationally in 60-plus yard passing plays allowed, with 3 of those. That's really the only blemish this defense has had, is giving up big plays uncharacteristically, and that's certainly not great. I think even Iowa State had one that really flipped the script on this game, and Iowa, that's not how they want to operate. If they give up points, so be it, but it's usually going to be 5 to 7 minute drives where you have to earn it, not just, a big play downfield. That totally is out of the game plan for Iowa, and that's what Ohio State can bring to the table. Long touchdowns, quick drives, and when your offense, doesn't really move that fast, and they go 3 and out pretty often, they punt it a lot, that can make this defense very tired early. So certainly want to slow this game down. Can't do that for allowing big passing plays. I think the secondary will certainly be better. Some of the other guys they have in this group, Quinn Schlutt and Xavier Nwankpa at safety, very good players. You also, a high-end recruit in Nwankpa, who has been a good player for them. Hasn't played as many snaps so far this year, but Schlutt, on the other hand, he's a veteran. This is going to be a great matchup. I think this is a phenomenal defense, top to bottom. It's always fun to see this chess match of them against an elite offense, where they're typically just on the field too much, and that allows them to crack. It's unfortunate, because you hate to see that happen to the Hawkeyes, because this defense really does play incredibly tough, incredibly hard, and they are very tough, especially in matchups like these. Now move to the Buckeyes defense. Of course, just a second ago I alluded to how they've been dominant against the run, giving up less than 2 yards per carry. They did allow 125 against Marshall, but they also ran the ball over 40 times, and they gave them a touchdown at like the 1 yard line or something. But there's no issues here with this run defense. This will be their first real test for them, of course, but I don't think it's one that they're going to fail by any means. It could be very competitive, though. I think Iowa can certainly throw a lot of jabs. Can the haymakers, though, can Ohio State stay away from avoiding those? I think they certainly can. You look at the edge rushers they have in JT Tumalau, Jack Sawyer. These guys are tremendous. Sawyer has just been heavily improved as a run defender, especially on the interior. Ty Hamilton, Tyleek Williams. You certainly want to check his status, but this is a team that's pretty deep on this D line in terms of size. They check out in those categories. Seems like Williams is going to play, though, so they won't lean as much on depth. Guys like Kenyatta Jackson, Mitch Melton, Caden Curry, whoever else might get on there. The depth is, I think, solid. It hasn't really been tested, and I don't think it really will until later in the year. This is an opponent year in Iowa, though. Again, they've been running the ball much better. They're pretty consistent in that category so far. This O-line is really good. You look at the middle of their defense, Sonny Styles doing very good, playing a more natural position for him. He's been the leading snap getter at linebacker. Cody Simon, he's been tremendous as well. Arvell Reese has been getting on the field a good bit. CJ Hicks starting to finally get on the field. He really hasn't been all that good, though. Probably won't see much of him in a big game like this. So at linebacker, they're very stout. They're probably not as good as Iowa, though, because Higgins is just that good of a player. But the middle of the defense for Ohio State, they're probably going to be pretty sound against tackling and slowing down Caleb Johnson. I'm not really too worried about it. You look in their secondary, I considered it, to be the best in the country coming into the year. I thought that the Jim Thorpe Award winner would probably come from this unit. Lathan Ransom, he's a phenomenal run stopper at safety, does a good job of matching up with tight ends as well. Caleb Downs, you think this is a matchup they're probably a guy like this would thrive in because he comes downhill in a hurry, can lay the boom, so good against the run. Obviously, he's tremendous in coverage as well. He's a physical player, though, so it's certainly going to be hard to crack these two safeties with what they want to do because it's a perfect matchup for these two safeties against this Hawkeye offense. Jordan Hancock, a real standout in the slot for them. Then you look at two veteran corners in Denzel Burke and Davison Igbeson. Davison's very good as a run stopper. Hasn't shown it as much this year so far, but this is a guy that I like. And, he's aggressive. He likes to get after it. So out on the edge, the receivers and the tight ends, trying to get around those guys. That's going to be a fun matchup to watch. I think it's one of the Buckeyes probably going to win more often than not. In terms of being tested downfield, I don't think it's going to happen one bit. I think they're just going to be able to sit in their coverage, and they're not going to move at the snap because they're so confident in their run-stopping abilities that these DBs will not have to come up to the line of scrimmage too many times. But I definitely think you can anticipate the safeties getting up there because they're so good at slowing down the run. You certainly want to play to your attributes. But in terms of these corners, they're just going to sit back and coverage them. They're not going to react too much. But if the run game starts getting going and some play action comes to the table, you certainly got to be aware that you don't want to let a guy be wide open downfield. There's not much speed at all in the Iowa receiving corps, so I don't think they're going to be tested at all here. But again, got to be disciplined against play action. That's the only concern that you got to think of. Look at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons. I think the Hawkeyes have the edge at linebacker. Everywhere else across the board, it's going to be for Ohio State. Probably the top roster in the country right now. Maybe you can make a consolation for the offensive line for Iowa, but I'm not going to do that. I think the Buckeyes will get the nod there. Even though the Hawkeyes are playing very good up front, I certainly think that the Buckeyes across the board, though, it's too hard to make too many other advantages elsewhere. Ohio State's just too good, too talented, and too much athletic ability. Look at the final thoughts and the prediction. Keys to the game for Iowa. The only way to win a game like this is you got to force turnovers. You got to take some risks on offense with your passing attack. Obviously, I'm not really sure how you're going to do that, but they can also be, faking punts, going forward on fourth and short, faking field goals, whatever it may be. You got to take risks, and I certainly anticipate that they will. It's the only way you're going to win with this scheme going on the road to Columbus. It's just too much of a challenge for the Buckeyes. Just play your game. Be sound. Don't make mistakes. That's what the last thing you want to do against a team like this. If you make mistakes, they're certainly going to make you pay. You're trying to play from behind against this defense is going to be tough. You want to pressure the secondary for Iowa as well and collapse their run game. And I think you'll see a good bit of that. The thing about the Hawkeyes is they play incredibly tough for 4 quarters, but eventually they just get grinded down on because the defense is on the field for so long. The field position battle starts going in favor of their opponent, and they're just too tough. They're too slow on offense. To be able, too much of a slouch that is, to be able to counteract. You've seen it last year when they played Penn State, where they had 76 yards of offense on only 33 plays, while their defense gave up less than 400 yards on almost 100 plays. I mean, they're on the field that long and only gave up that many yards. I mean, that's a very impressive effort. That's what you want to avoid. That was a 31-0 loss, 31-6 here. I think they'll have some scoring opportunities. I think this run game will be able to break off a couple of runs. I think they'll certainly be able to put themselves in position for the special teams to work. I think Ohio State, at the end of the day, they'll start to find their rhythm, and too many plays for this defense will start to wear on them. So it can be it for today's episode, guys. Can Iowa win this game? I really don't think that they can. Good football team at the end of the day, though. A defense that Ohio State, they're well aware of, and they're going to know at the end of the day that the Hawkeyes were here to play, and they're going to feel the effects the next day because it's going to be a physical affair. Iowa, though, it's going to be very difficult for them. Though. You're going to have to make a million mistakes on the other side for you to have a chance in a game like this. But, certainly people always root for the Hawkeyes to keep games close because it's always exciting. one of the last great defensive teams still in CFB. So that's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.